You are now listening to
Chakras and Shotguns. Welcome back to Chakras and Shotguns, episode 17. I'm Jenn.
And I'm Mick. Welcome back.
How are you?
You know, I'm good. We had a little project, our new website that I've been working on, flexing my web developer skills that aren't that advanced, but, you know, I can do a little something.
Don't sell yourself short, boo.
I mean, you know.
You killed it.
So, yeah, it's finally up. I don't know if you guys have looked in the past at chakrasandshotguns.com. It's been our like Buzzsprout kind of basic podcast site in the past. But now that domain is hosting a whole new site that has the podcast episodes. It has a merch store with t-shirts.
Ooh.
And it also has a list of book recommendations and like the links to be able to get a lot of the books that we've talked about on past episodes right there on the site. So take a look.
Yeah, by the time this episode is live, the website should be up for a couple of weeks. So
yeah,
if you haven't had a chance, go look at it. It was definitely another labor of love. But Mick made it so easy. But yeah, I remember we launched the podcast and I had friends saying like, where's the merch? I was like, nobody's even like really listened to what we have to say. Why are you asking about t-shirts?
Exactly.
But now we have some and they were selected with care. So I'm very excited about it. Great job, boo.
Thank you, sweetheart. How are things with you though?
Let's see. Busy all the time. We had a sick kiddo this week. Some of the stuff that we did to take care of her, I'd love to talk about on the podcast another day. So like all my homeopathic herbalist ways.
Yeah, Jen's our little herbalist.
Which I feel like some people think that like the hippy dippy parents are just like, oh, just put some air on it and just like let it breathe. But like, no, it's a lot of work. Like I could just throw children's Benadryl at her and there's a place and time for that, but it's a lot of different little moving parts. So she's on the mend. So that's great. And then I had a reading with Melanie Esperon this week. So if you have not had a chance, go back and listen to that episode 14.
Yep.
Episode 14, I count backwards. Episode 14 with Melanie, our favorite medium and spiritual friend. So she's one of our faves. Always amazing. I'm always like, how do you top that first reading if you've never had like an hour-long session with like a really truly gifted clairvoyant? And we always do. And she tells me things and I'm just like, and when am I supposed to do that? So this one was really focused on like business and kind of like what's up ahead for me. So lots of things to be excited about, lots of work, but thankfully everything lights me up, which is exactly the direction that I'm trying to go personally in life with like business and career and projects and creativity and passions. And so very excited for the path that I am currently on.
It's so interesting that you talk about the work, right? I got an angel card deck. That was actually a gift from Melanie. And yesterday I pulled a card and I hadn't pulled one in probably, I don't know, like a month. And the card I got was do the work. And I was like, okay, well, I got more work to do. And it kind of leads nicely into what we're going to talk about today, I guess.
Yes.
Why don't we do the breath work first though?
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. All right. So find yourself in a comfortable seat, or you can lay down as always. And let's just get mindful of our breath and see where we may be holding some tension. So let's take a deep breath in, expanding your belly. And let's sigh that out through the mouth. One more time, let's take a deep breath in And let's audibly sigh that out of the mouth. One more deep inhale. And let's seal the lips and exhale out through your nose. And now that we're a bit more mindful of our breath and we're cleansing and releasing some stale energy, or where we might have been holding our breath and didn't even realize it, I want you to take a moment and just think about yourself. We're getting a little self-centered today in a good way. And I want you to think of one attribute about yourself, a characteristic, something about you as a person that you're really, really proud of. And maybe that's your kindness. Maybe it's your sense of humor. It might be your legs. But something preferably internal that's inherent to you that you love, that you think brings light into your life and others' lives. And because we like to manifest these things in the physical, I want you to think of that attribute and put a smile on your face. And show gratitude to yourself for sharing that positive attribute of yourself with others. Thank you for being you. Let's slowly open our eyes, if they were closed, and get into the rest of the show.
Thanks so much, Jen. That was great. I had a little trouble coming up with my positive attribute because I was over here thinking about your legs. You know, you mentioned them, and I was just thinking about how much I like your legs. So, I just had to take a moment and pull myself back into the breath work. But no, it was good job. Good job.
I was proud of my breath work. I was proud of my ability to come up with visualizations for this podcast.
I was visualizing.
Oh my gosh. Anyway. Today, we're still in the love and the light, but of course, life is all about balance, the yin, the yang of it. So today, we're talking about shadow, and specifically shadow work. And we're going back and forth. And because this topic is so important, and it's something that, as we, dig deeper into this topic, we all need to do, the thing that kept popping into my head was, you better work, bitch. Hence the title of today's episode. So for some of you, you might be like, okay, but what is it? And, when we started on the spiritual journey, I would hear the term like thrown around a lot, especially on social media, like, oh yeah, I was doing my shadow work. And oh yeah, when I was working on my shadow. And I was like, what is that? So it's like shadow work. Everybody does it. You need to do your shadow work. And that's something you need to consult with your shadow. And so like, we know what a shadow is. Like, our toddler knows what a shadow is. Yeah. Most of us, if not all of us, go to work, but what do they mean together? And so it's another one of those terms where you're like, I understand the word. It's not a word I haven't heard before, but I don't understand the term. So, yeah. Mick, what's the actual factual definition of shadow work?
Yeah. So just to go back a little bit, you hear this term in this spiritual space, and it's one of those things that, again, you know the individual word definitions, but when I first came across the term, I was like, is this something out of like a horror movie? Is this like from The Craft? Yeah, like, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, I don't know. I'm going to keep moving on this one. This is like very early in the spiritual journey. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for that yet. I don't want to open that book. But no, so just to kind of give a definition, um, it was a term that was coined by the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung back in 1963. And I think we mentioned this on a previous episode before. But it's not a brand new concept. Other psychologists and texts, they will refer to shadow work as things like self-examination or self-reflection. Personally, I think shadow work sounds more intentional than kind of those larger umbrella terms. Carl Jung specifically wrote that the shadow is that hidden or repressed, for the most part inferior and guilt-laden personality whose ultimate ramifications reach back into the realm of our animal ancestors and so comprise the whole historical aspect of the unconscious.
Yeah, so we were putting this together and we read that quote. We were both like, what? So in other words, these are our behaviors that we exhibit unconsciously sometimes. Sometimes they're unconsciously, or it's kind of like, I think when we say unconsciously, it's also you do it without thinking. And so when those behaviors come to mind, when we think about that side of ourself, it brings up feelings of fear and shame. And so the animal part of Jung's definition, these behaviors are usually primitive and negative emotions like rage, envy, greed, etc., which sounds a lot like the unhealthy emotional sides of the three tribal chakras, the root, the sacral, and the solar plexus. If you want to learn more about those three chakras in particular, we definitely suggest our episodes on each one of those.
Yeah, episodes 4, 5, and 6, I believe.
Oh, thank you.
So some more examples of kind of some shadow behaviors. You may have like a quick or explosive temper. You could be judgmental and critical of others. You could be very overbearing, whether that's at work or with friends or with others. And a lot of addictive behaviors are reflections of that shadow as well.
And I think when you talk about shadow and like what brings up fear or shame, I think those are the ones that come to mind the easiest, but they also go beyond typical quote unquote negative traits. So remember from the definition, these are things about yourself that bring you fear and shame, but they're also things that that you perceive as dark or weak about yourself. So you hide them. So depending on how you feel about yourself, like your own self-esteem at the time, or, how you were raised or whatever's going on, it can also be things like social anxiety. You could hide your emotional sensitivity. For instance, if emotions weren't valued, how you were raised, like it was something that you didn't cry, like you weren't allowed to show emotion. So that might be something you hide, how sensitive you actually are. Also with repression, sexual repression, like sexual desires. I think, it's something that you might be ashamed of that you can't change about yourself. Megan and I talk a lot about American in particular culture around sex and sexuality and like, without going on a whole tangent, just like how American children, if we were painting with a broad brush, are not taught to understand themselves. Like they don't even have the right vocabulary for body parts, or how a lot of healthy sexual desires are often told to be repressed to people like into adulthood. And so how they don't really know how to navigate that and what that looks like. And so something that we might think is that's fine, love is love, like, and you don't know how to handle that, you can repress that. And that's not necessarily a negative, quote unquote, trait, but it's something that because of how you were raised or things that you might have dealt with or societal pressures that you've decided to repress, and that becomes part of your shadow. There can also be like on that same thought of, like maybe you're not an angry person, or maybe, you don't have a huge jealousy streak. You could do a lot of people pleasing, and be ashamed of how much you desire for other people to like you or approve of you. Perfectionism is another behavior that can commonly be found in someone's shadow. That what I've come to find about myself and other people that I know who are recovering perfectionists is this can look like everything has to be done just so. Everything has to be at a very high standard. And other people around you might struggle with that. Mick. But sometimes what they don't realize is like that you're very, very critical of yourself and your own imperfections. And that's why you demand perfection outside of yourself. So I think this is the definition. So part of the shadow is it's like, what do you hate about other people? And maybe examine whether or not there's something in your own personality and how you behave that also exhibits that trait. So like I read in one example, there was a boss who just always was like, you guys are lazy. You're so lazy. And he would just go on and on and on about how lazy his team was. But he actually perceived himself to be lazy at times. He may have even thought, if he was a manager and was like higher level, that he wasn't really doing much of anything, that he wasn't a doer on the team, so that he was really lazy. And so he projected that onto the rest of his team. So a pet peeve of mine is like just shoddy, half-assed work. Like if we're gonna talk about like me at work, I can't stand typos. If I find a typo in something in print or like on TV, like it goes through me. I'm like, how did no one proofread this? If you need someone to proofread something, ask Jenn to do it. I'll do it with a fine-tooth comb. However, there was a period of my life, especially starting out in my career, where my perfectionism like really got out of hand. Like it was crippling. Like it took me so long to put out work product, to turn something into my boss or send something back to a client, because I just wanted to make sure it was absolutely perfect. And so I think sometimes others can perceive me as like, she's so demanding and how could I ever meet her standards? And everything has to be just so, and she should just lighten up. But what they don't realize is, as hard as I am externally, I'm actually really hard on myself internally. And it's something that like, I don't know if shame would be the right word. Maybe it is, but it is something that I'm kind of like, you really shouldn't be that hard on yourself. Mm. Maybe I am a little, I guess you would be ashamed. Like, when they talk about if a friend talked to you the way you talk to you, would you want to be that person's friend? So I guess that does bring up some feelings of shame, that it's like, you really shouldn't be that hard on yourself. You can really beat yourself up sometimes. And like, that's something that I'm working through. And out of necessity, having 2 kids and working full-time jobs and doing this podcast and other things, like I can't be perfect all the time.
I think that, yeah, what you're talking about is definitely something that is common to a lot of high achievers. I've certainly had to deal with some of that negative self-talk, and just making sure that I speak to myself more kindly. But I also think, just kind of going back to what you spoke about with the hiding of emotions, I think a lot of men in particular kind of struggle with that as part of their shadow. I think about my dad, my granddad. They were both very old school men. They never showed emotion outside of pretty much anger or like contentment. And, that was kind of taught to me as well, right? Like that's the way in which a man is supposed to express his emotions.
And was that contentment, like, is that also tempered? Like, like on the spectrum of happiness, like you can't get to like glee.
Oh yeah, no, you can't be too excited or giddy. Like that's not seen as like masculine, right? So like,
unless it's like sports.
But even that is more like a masculine, yeah, as opposed to like a,
oh my God.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's a little bit different. So, I mean, I've talked, I think, on other episodes about like the limited emotional range that men are allowed to have. And I think that is, connected to this idea of shadow work. And so I think about like our marriage, right? And how like early on, I didn't really know how to express when my feelings were hurt. It would kind of just come out as anger. Like I'd just be mad. And because that's the emotion that I had been kind of conditioned to be okay expressing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so I think about when we went to like counseling and like learning how to talk through my feelings, you know, in using the language that doesn't like put blame on you or like express anger towards you and like shows like this is how I felt when you did this, as opposed to like just being mad. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that was like work. And I think I was doing like shadow work even before I knew what the term shadow work was back then. And I even think about becoming a dad. I think that particularly being a girl dad, because I think in a lot of ways it has opened me up to express a more complete range of emotions that I maybe would not have felt as comfortable expressing with a son, because I'm used to like the way my dad, you know, parented me,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it's kind of like that kind of going down the male lineage, how we've been parented for generations, right? And kind of that same cycle of not allowing your son to appear soft by expressing his emotions. So
there's a couple of really interesting things there, because going back to the marriage thing, I remember having to like mentally dig through, like I'd be like, we're fighting, he's upset, but like I don't understand, and like having to like really like, on the face of it, he's like, rawr, but I'm like digging, and I'm like, oh, this hurt his feelings. Like we've since moved past that. Like you can be like, this hurt my feelings. And when we're just talking about like being in relationship or in friendship, and people can't get to the root of what that emotion is, it's really hard to engage with each other, because we're not really saying what needs to be said, or like we're just not really, the other person can't understand, because you're saying like, I don't know, you're saying one thing, but really the truth of it is something deeper than that. And like how important that is, because I think the other person's knee-jerk reaction to anger should be very different from the reaction to your close loved one's feelings being hurt by an action that you did, right? And so like that just helped, even though that was vulnerable for you, it very much so helped us get to the root and the solution a lot quicker, I think, personally. There's also what you were saying about the girls being born. What I find very interesting is about all of that is that it was instant. It was like she was born like in the room, and like Mick was forever changed. Like that was it. Okay. That was all.
Definitely.
And she was a newborn baby. Like she was just like, what the fuck is this? It's loud. It's bright in here. I want to go back. My mom was eating pizza. Like, no. But like she wasn't verbal. So we've heard men say this, over and over again about how like their daughter was born and they were forever changed. And it's not like she was verbal and was like, Daddy, I want to talk to you about my feelings. Like, no, she just got here. But I think that's a testament to how deep that conditioning is, because had a son come out of my body, you would have been like, okay, and you got to get with the program. It's just like, even like that, we don't even realize that the conditioning is there before we even enter parenthood.
Yeah, for sure. And I think particularly for me, I'm a Pisces moon, and like we're like really, really sensitive. Pisces moons like are just like known for being super sensitive. And like I have like repressed a lot of that over the course of my life. Like, no, I'm not going to be sensitive. I'm going to numb that. And so I think part of this shadow work is like me being okay with having like highly sensitive emotions. And we talked about like how both of us are empaths. And I think part of it is I think you just naturally are more empathic, but also you tend to be more empathic because I've like spent so much time dulling that like emotional sensitivity, where like it'll pop out sometimes and it'll like kind of shock me, like, oh, I'm like really sensitive to that right now. Like, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like starting to I guess, be more sensitive than it has been in the past.
Yeah, we've had a couple of readings. Like the first couple of times they were like, oh, and Mick, oh, he's such a strong empath. And I'm like, who? Him? No, 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 no. I cry on Campbell Soup commercials, okay? I'm the MVP around this. Okay? But yes, it's beautiful to see. We also had another reading and like without getting into the details, but because of how our charts look, we actually bring that out of each other. And so I tell Mick all the time. I was like, before we got together, I was not out here crying and, feeling all vulnerable and like an exposed nerve. And like we bring that out of each other, apparently. So interesting about how our energy interacts with each other. The last one that I want to talk about that's also interesting to me, and I'm also wondering if this one can be typically something you see in women. Part of your shadow could be hiding your personal power or independence. To like that conversation about how men are conditioned. I wonder if that's something that like women can be conditioned into, where it's like it's societally or maybe in your family not okay for women to be really strong and independent and own their personal power, and like it scares them a little bit. Like it scares them to take up space. I'm always talking about like taking up space, and it scares them to like really own that about themselves, to where they are more dependent on others like taking charge and leadership, but they're fully capable of like really owning that and stepping into that. So that was an interesting one that I saw, that was a shadow behavior. And as we're talking about all these shadow behaviors, some of our listeners out there might not be what's the word I'm looking for? They
receptive.
I was gonna say they might be delusional. And you're like, I'm so nice and I'm so happy and there's nothing really dark about me. Every single one of us has a shadow self. And that is, if we simply look at shadow, without light, there is no shadow. So without those really beautiful parts about yourself, there could be no shadow. It's all about balance. And so without shadow, there is no light. So we have to have these light and dark parts of ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're highlighting kind of one of these key principles of the universe, right? This idea of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has two poles, whether that's hot, cold, soft, hard, sharp, dull, loud, quiet. There are these spectrums that we see throughout just the universe. And it's fundamental to our existence here. You see it in a lot of religious texts, most notably in Genesis, the very beginning, when God creates light, he separates it from darkness. Again, highlighting that duality, those opposite poles. You can't have that one extreme without the other. So, I mean, even if you just kind of conceptually think about it, if there was no darkness and there was only light, you wouldn't be able to recognize light as light. Like it has to have its opposite.
Yeah, it's counterpoint.
Yeah, to be able to be identified. So, yeah.
So to Mick's point, understanding and embracing that shadow part of yourself allows you to be better in the light. So if you can unpack why you're sad, like what is what's making you sad, then you can fully feel joy. If you can understand what makes you angry, like really what really grinds your gears, then you might be in a position to set better boundaries. And so the deeper you dig and understand yourself, then that also helps you better understand others and what they're going through too.
Yeah, definitely. Carl Jung, he talks about the collective shadow a lot. And so essentially think about a group of people who, it could be a country, it could be a culture, and they collectively have these aspects that are shadow that oftentimes can overtake the collective consciousness. So I think some of the obvious examples are like Nazi Germany, where there was this idea that kind of got latched onto that somehow Jewish people were responsible for the economic condition of the populace in Germany. And so that shadow again overtook the collective consciousness. You can even think about some of the aspects that we see in the conservative movement in America as well as and abroad, who again are embracing that similar ideology of blaming other groups for the economic position of certain folks in the country. And yeah, I mean, I think you can see it show up in a lot of different cultures over the course of history.
So what's really interesting about that is that your shadow, especially in this context of like anger or hate against others, your shadow that affects you as an individual can also affect all. It can multiply and become collective shadow. It can have just like a direct impact on a loved one. And so that's why shadow work is so important, because doing that individual work, not only does it make you better, but you're also going to be able to raise the vibrations and the healing for yourself, your immediate family, your relationships. And it can also impact your community and the world. And then even more so on top of that, I think something that another topic that we love to get into. There's a lot of conversation around generational curses. And if you're doing that healing to better understand your shadow, what are you not passing on in a great way? You're not passing on to your children and their children and their children. And so honestly, like that's part of your legacy to do your shadow work too. We also saw this with COVID-19. So we all thought we were retreating into our homes and isolating, but we saw real time how every action and decision impacts the collective. So what affects one can really affect all. And it's sometimes hard to see because we're so disconnected sometimes. And there's a part of me that I guess we're disconnected, but in some ways we're very like united into camps and bubbles. But for COVID, when everyone kind of went inside for quarantine, essential workers aside, of course, taking the time to, you be like, I ain't about to get sick. I'm not getting sick. Or maybe you had somebody in your household or in your family who was immunocompromised. So you were trying your best to keep them from getting sick. What you were doing, slowing down when everything got canceled, starting a meditation practice. Maybe you started a mindfulness practice, got back into yoga. You were alone with yourself. Maybe you realized you were not distracted long enough to realize that you needed to work through some shit. Maybe you got a therapist during quarantine, right? That was contributing to the collective light. You were working on yourself, which might have raised the vibrations in your household. You healed yourself. Others started to say like, oh, maybe I need to go work on myself. It might have healed your relationship. It might have helped you better navigate a friendship. And you can start to see how that shadow work, though it is an individual practice, it can have a collective impact. And so we often think of these things as like very isolated activities. But what we're seeing is if we're looking towards how we can increase the light of just like our home, what we'll end up doing if everyone starts buying into working on themselves, you start to have an impact on your community and ultimately the world. If collective shadow could create one of the most horrific human rights events in our history, what could collective light do?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point there. I think what we're trying to hopefully accomplish is getting more people to do that individual work so that we can get to the point where we're increasing that collective light. So that's kind of one of our goals of the podcast, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that definitely touches on some of the collective benefits. But I wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking about some of the individual benefits of shadow work. So some of those benefits include having that stronger connection with your intuition. So think about your crown chakra, your third eye chakra, really opening those up, increasing the power there, freeing yourself just from that unconscious shadow and that shame that you may be holding on to. So that kind of gets into the solar plexus and really having that self-confidence to really embrace your full self. And I think it also just allows you to tap better into your strengths. Once you really get in touch with your full self, you can really embrace the strengths that may come from both your light and your shadow side and really just embracing yourself as a whole.
Mm. And how do you start working on your shadow side? So it's usually one of the first things that you start to explore in therapy. I think to our earlier point about like the definition and people thinking like, well, what's that? That's like this far out term, but it's the work. It's the work that you're doing in traditional therapy with a therapist. So for the record, Shotguns and Shotguns, Mick and Jenn, we love therapy around here. The reasons why I love it so much is that it's a designated safe space with a professional who is there to help you unpack and understand your full self. So for me, personally, whenever I'm swirling on something like a problem or a conflict or I'm stressed, I don't always want to talk about it with Mick or my mom or my friends. And honestly, and I think this is something that we miss out on, sometimes the people that you're talking to and venting to, sometimes they don't have the emotional bandwidth to take that on. And it's not that they have to like put it in their backpack too, but you know, they might also be swirling on something. And so it's something that I try to check in. I probably should do more often before I like just start like dumping my day on somebody. But that's why I like therapy, because even though it's transactional, like I'm paying for you to create this space, I think the transactional side of it makes it a little bit more free to really like be in that space and be present and actually like work through it.
Yeah, I think when you're talking to like your family, like, am I talking too much? Am I putting too much on them? Right? There's like this hesitancy. Maybe you want to hold back a little bit because you don't want them to judge you fully for all the things that you may be struggling with. Whereas a therapist is fully trained to, you know, hear those things and give you some positive suggestions and not judge you.
And remember, shadow work, fear and shame. There may be things that you're ashamed about that you don't even want to talk to your loved ones about. And so for some people, having that kind of transactional type relationship, it creates this space where you can talk about those things. Also, sometimes you want to talk about the people that you need to talk to. And so if you're having an issue with your partner or...
I was about to say, it felt real personal there. I was like, you know, you was referring to me, I feel like.
Not necessarily, but you can get some smoke too.
I'm just saying I felt it right there, right that moment, you know.
Yes.
No, but one thing I just wanted to call out, you know, therapy does, particularly in the United States, come with some hurdles when it comes to access. Finding a therapist, finding one who's taking new patients, who can meet at the times that you have available in your schedule. You know, does your insurance help pay for this particular provider? These are all things that, you know, we've had to navigate when we were trying to find our therapists, both individually and as a couple. And so, yeah, I don't want to lightly say, oh, just go get a therapist, because I know it's hard. The barrier can be significant. So it does require some kind of thoughtful planning to find the right person.
Yeah. Sometimes just like even getting to the right resource to access just to start finding a therapist can be so difficult. I remember I was looking for a therapist. I was under a lot of work stress at the time. And I think I was trying to go through the insurance. And I ended up calling this number and leaving a message, and they called me back and they were like, hey, like, what's going on? I was like, yeah, I'm trying to find a therapist. And they were like, oh, this is the psych ward. And I was like, what? Well, I don't, they were like, do you need help? I was like, no, not that there's anything wrong with that if you need help. But it was like, it shouldn't be that hard. And I think ultimately, and I had fairly good insurance, it was like 2 therapists that I could go to. And when I started going to that person, it was like somebody else that worked in my office was like there at the time, like in the hour block before me. And we're looking at each other like, well, this is freaking awkward.
Were you there to talk about that person?
No, we did not work in the same department.
You said work stress. I was just.
But then it was like, well, I don't want to be in her business either, So whatever. Thankfully, we weren't in the waiting room at the same time, but it was like, she was at 5 and I was at 6. And that's, there's also like, you want a little bit of anonymity too. So like, I just found that to be so disgraceful. But like, let's skip ahead and like, you find a therapist who works at the right time, who's like at the right time. You saw their picture. They look nice. Your gut instinct wasn't like, no. And so, but it's like the worst kind of dating. Like you're trying to find the one. So that same therapist where like, my colleague was also going there. The man was very, very nice. He was very, very nice. He was older. So like demographically, like we did not have anything in common really. But his type of therapy, he got out a whiteboard in every session and would like start mapping out like scientifically and analytically like how our brains like work through thoughts. And I was like, dude, I'm out of school. I don't want to go back to school. And I don't want to pay nobody else for school, okay? Because I'm done with that. So
my man was giving you a lecture.
A whole lecture. And so like I would tell people, I was like, yeah, my therapist gives me lectures. And people were like, what? Like they thought he was like, Jennifer, you need to get yourself together. And blah, blah. I was like, no. He has a whiteboard and he's drawing out flow charts. And I'm trying to talk about my feelings.
Did he give you a syllabus? Like, did you have to?
He did give me books. Oh my gosh. He was like, I want you to read this book. And I was like, dude, I'm telling you that I'm so stressed out at work that I don't have to. And you want me to read this psychology book? Oh my gosh. But since then, I've like found a great therapist. She's like a woman around my age. Like we both have children and, it was just a better fit. But I think sometimes the barrier to entry is so freaking high. And I think that's what it was. It was like I had called a psych ward on accident. I finally get in to meet this person. I don't think it's a good fit like by session 2. But I'm like, well, shit, I'm here. So like, we have a session on the books. Is it helping? I'm not really sure. And like being able to pull the ripcord and be like, no, I'm going to try again. So it can be hard.
For sure. Specifically for the fellas, I just want to address what I feel like is a hesitancy that I see in a lot of the men that I have, in my life and my family, with going to therapy. Like, there's no value judgment on you as a man if you feel like you need to go talk to someone. Like it's very beneficial for you. Trust me, you will feel better. Just take that burden off of you. Don't burden your wife with it. I know a lot of men say like, oh, I could just talk to my wife. Like, again, as we talked about earlier, your wife should not be your therapist. People in your family should not be your therapist. There's probably things that you don't even want to tell her. So invest the time, find a good therapist. There's a great website out there called therapyforblackmen.org that I definitely want to pub. It's how I've been able to find myself and other men in my family good therapists. So check it out. Yeah, that's my soapbox on men going to therapy.
Some other resources that we found that are really helpful. Open Path Collective is a resource for affordable counseling because we didn't even talk about like it can be like freaking expensive. So the sessions are between $30 and $60 per session. You can also, what I love about that site, you can filter by ethnicity or specialty. So, people of color wanting to find other people of color, or older people wanting to find people who have experience working with people in that stage of life, or or, mothers or like new parents. And so, finding someone who has those types of specialties can really hone in very quickly on who you ultimately want to be your therapist. Another one, I know we see this one. I'm laughing because I feel like another podcast talks about this one all the time, Talkspace.
Yeah.
So Talkspace, Michael Phelps is spokesperson. So they provide convenience and you're not limited to the therapist in your immediate area. So if you live somewhere that's like maybe not an urban center, so there might not be a lot of therapists, or if you live somewhere really in a really small town and you don't want everybody knowing your business, Talkspace. Because I think there are some people, I saw one review where they were like, I can send them a note at 2 a.m. and like, that's how we talk.
Nice.
And so I think that also can broaden your search in a good way.
Yeah.
Right.
There's also a lot of great personalities on social media that offer kind of quick suggestions, tips. One of my favorites in the space is Dr. Adia Gooden. She has a podcast and as well as a Instagram account. So we will link to her. Shout out to Adia. But yeah, there's also a lot of other folks that are available on the social media apps that you can check out as well.
Yes. My caveat to that would be find a professional. Like Adia, Dr. Gooden is a professional. Like this is what she does. There are a lot of people who just like get on Twitter and just be talking shit. So,
Discernment. You're
right. Discernment. Yes. We'll be sure to put all of those resources in the show notes.
Other ways that you can work on your shadow side. So journaling. I think this is a really great way to get your thoughts out. You can just really use writing to express your fears and things you feel ashamed about. There's also dream work. This is probably going to be kind of its own independent episode, but we're always talking about how a dream isn't just a dream. Not only can you receive divine messages, but you can also do shadow work in your dreams. So keep a dream journal and see what themes keep coming up for you. And then lastly, working with crystals. So there are a lot of great benefits to crystals. We talked about how they can assist your chakras, but you can also use them for shadow work. So some good ones are black kyanite, smoky quartz, and rose quartz. Those are all good for shadow work.
And then what? You work on your shadow self and it just magically goes away? No, that's not what we were saying this entire episode. Were you even paying attention? Remember, it's about freedom from your shadow and balance, not elimination. So when you're free from those areas of yourself that used to bring up fear and shame, you're just getting to a more full, whole picture of self. So the ultimate goal is for you to be able to be your full, lighter self. Like, with no fear, no shame, like this is who I am. You're presenting yourself fully. However, you're not being the full asshole part of yourself. Okay. One thing I wanted to talk about, it's a little bit of as seen on TV. Shadow work wasn't specifically mentioned, but one of our favorite shows is Sex Education on Netflix, and they're in season 3. And there was a character who was talking to a therapist, and she asked him, what makes you happy? Like, what brings you joy? But I think she was like, what's something that makes you happy? And he couldn't come up with anything. He had nothing. And that was because his father was very hard on him and emotions were weak. And so he wasn't allowed to show any type of emotion, including happiness or joy. And so ultimately that character was able to like reconnect with himself and exhibit those emotions, and how he started to present this fuller part of himself and like dramatically impact his friends and family. They're like, who are you? And also like, where have you been?
Yeah, Jen, I think that's a great example of shadow work in pop culture. So if you guys haven't already seen Sex Education, check it out on Netflix. It's a great show. To kick off or even continue your shadow work, we wanted to book in this episode with another exercise. This time, it's a journaling one. So feel free to pause the episode now and grab your favorite journal and a pen. And we're going to go through a few prompts and see what comes up.
So we're going to start this journaling exercise, and we want to release ourselves from any expectations and just let whatever comes up come up and onto your paper. So the first question, what emotions tend to bring out the worst in you? Why do you think that is? Question 2. How are you letting yourself down at this time in your life? How could you be better to yourself? And question 3, what does freedom mean to you? All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed the episode. We hope you start digging deep into your shadow side and really understanding how that makes you tick.
All right, guys. As always, go ahead and email us at chakrasandshotguns@gmail.com. If you have any questions, it could be shadow work related or any of our previous episodes. We will include lots of great resources in the show notes, things that we talked about. And also check out our new website, chakrasandshotguns.com.
You can also pick up a new journal in our merch store.
Yes, you can.
All right. Namaste.